Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And if you regularly follow Midday with Reverend Don, you will know that you can type your questions or comments into whatever page, whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll show up here in my chat room, which I now have displayed on the screen, and we can talk directly. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday. I hope you've had a wonderful week. Today is kind of open subject day. I have no particular subject to talk about, but I have a few in mind I may migrate through. But also, if anyone has any interesting subjects they'd like to discuss, feel free to put them in, and we can talk about that. Yesterday, we were talking about the Witchy Awards through modernwitch.com, and we encourage everyone to go and nominate the people that they feel are most deserving of the Witchy Awards, which will be voted on in January. And I would certainly be gratified if some of our Pagan World shows and personalities were among those to be nominated, but whoever you think is your favorite vidcaster, your favorite blogger, your favorite author, your favorite tarot creator, um, it would be good to go and nominate them. And that again is at modernwitch.com. And one of the reasons for this is that for a lot of creators in the pagan community, one of the things that most makes it worthwhile is recognition. Being told that what they do is good and valued. And this is one way to do that. Um, there often aren't a lot of objective rewards. It's more knowing that your work is helping people, touching people, making a difference in their lives. So, awards such as this can be um, very encouraging to people who are creating material, and sometimes can be the thing that keeps them creating when they might otherwise be questioning their reason to do so. So I highly encourage this sort of award program. And I think the more of them we have, the better off we're going to be. I think that it's very beneficial to let people know that their work is beneficial. I was going to talk also today about another subject I often touch upon. And if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you will know that I'm not a great fan of certain aspects of computer grammar programs. I do understand that grammar programs in and of themselves are a good thing, especially for many people. But they have a quality I don't like, which is trying to encourage highly curtailed, concise, quote, concise language, end quote, which I don't think is really a good idea. And it occurred to me this morning in a conversation I was having exactly why I feel that way. Um, in a way that had not quite registered with me before. You know, often when people are communicating through writing, especially now, especially in um, internet situations, they often run into misunderstandings because they cannot hear each other's tone of voice, and um, they miss the, I guess we'd say, personal nuances that you have in spoken conversation. And I was expressing to the person I was talking with that, you know, this was not necessarily the case. Oh, and hello to Sarat in the chat room. It's good to see you. Not necessarily the case in an earlier era where people did lots of correspondence. And people observed a lot of ways of trying to get those spoken nuances into their writing at that time. But with the coming of the telephone, a lot of people forgot how to write in that way. By the time emails and messenger systems had become a common thing, they mostly didn't remember the niceties, which had been the case with writing previously. And consequently, they were not recreating those nuances. And I think that the way that many of the grammar programs encourage people to write further strips those things out. And I don't know that that's a good thing. I think that anything that increases our ability to communicate civilly is a good thing. And concise language is not that. Um, it often makes us seem very harsh when we don't necessarily mean to be. Um, and I think that, what are sometimes called, well, using a softer voice can sometimes be a very beneficial thing. At least that's how I look at it. And I try to write, when I write, in the same way that I would have written correspondence. Um, well, when I was young and correspondence was still a thing. Um, and I think that it's a skill that we really need to kind of bring back. Um, because I think we lose sometimes by trying to, excuse me, by trying to make our meanings extremely plain and concise. I think we sometimes actually lose our meanings. Um, because we lose, again, those spoken nuances, which we have difficulty putting into writing, and which most people these days don't even try to put into writing. When writing a book, and earlier this week we had a program on the subject of writing a book. I always make it a point to try to recreate, um, to at least some extent, the flow of spoken language. I think I was talking about how, particularly in writing the novel that I put together, and also, though, pretty much anything I put together, I usually will read it out loud to make sure that it flows properly and to make sure that it actually sounds the way I want it to sound when it's spoken aloud. Um, and I think this is something that is very helpful because, there can be a very drastic difference between spoken language and written language. Um, and this is, I think, certainly appropriate, but sometimes we need to have a little bit more of a merger. If you were to read my my degree lessons, for example, and then read Rev Don's books of questions, the books of questions were taken from my videos and literally recreate my spoken language. And certainly for purposes of writing, it's much less thorough than my written language. But I would like to think that the written language continues to carry forward, um, I guess what I would say is the friendliness of the voice. And I think that this is something we do well to consider. We're in an age, well, and every age is a change in our language. Every generation speaks a little differently. Um, and I think that very often we're not overly aware of the changes that we're making. One of the things that certainly constantly has been happening with the English language is that it's been becoming simpler as it goes. There is a long-term goal in English to say as much as possible with as few words as possible, which is good. But we also have held on to our older forms, which allow us to say the same thing a little more formally, maybe a little more civilly at the same time. One of the things I noticed years ago, and I noticed that actually riding buses in Chicago, there would be instructions at the door, for example, for how to open the door in English and Spanish. And English was always much shorter. And I would read the Spanish, and its grammatical form was more formal. But the way that it was phrased could also have been said in English and would be equally proper with the shorter form that had been used. And I've always thought that was one of the great strengths of the English language, that you could take either route. And I think it's very important that we maintain that. The strength of the English language is its complexity. The very many ways that we can say things in the English language, um, that in certain other languages we'll have maybe one way to say them, maybe two ways to say them, we'll have five. And I see that as giving us a much greater flexibility in our communication. Communication tends to be a big thing for me. It's always been a big thing in my life. I am a Gemini. Um, and I think maintaining the flexibility of our communication, maintaining the versatility of our communication is very important. Um, and something I think we often don't think about. Um, when we look at the development of the English language, one of the things we see is that it has changed very rapidly over the centuries. There are people who, I mean, for most people, early modern English is fully intelligible with contemporary English. Hello to Tina in the chat room. It's good to see you, Tina. But I have met people who find that they cannot find their way through early modern English, which was only 500 years ago. Then you look at a language like Greek. Um, and, if you can speak Greek today, modern Greek, you can, with a little help, find your way through most earlier forms of the language. I've been told that if you speak modern Greek, you can pick your way through Homeric Greek, um, with occasionally looking up certain words and having to fill in a few blanks. But you can find your way through it a heck of a lot more than a speaker of modern English could find their way through Old English, which is absolutely unintelligible to a speaker of modern English. So English is a very fast changing language. And it's because we're constantly developing, constantly evolving, constantly adapting it. One of the, well, am I going to put it in that very aggressive fashion? I guess I will. One of the silliest things I've seen um, is a movement among certain English speakers to try to remove all of the loan words from the language and stick with only the words of purely Germanic origin, English being a Germanic language. And I think that is an exact wrong-headed point of view. Now, it is interesting to hear it. As an exercise, it's an interesting thing, but as a serious proposition, I think it greatly weakens the language. And Tina says, we've had a few people that offered to teach me Greek. Greek is a fascinating language. I recommend you go ahead and learn it if you have the chance. And one of the interesting things about Greek is that many words can take on many different meanings, depending variously on how they're used and how they're meant. And one of the interesting things about Greek is because of this, certain sentences, certain ideas can be interpreted very differently depending which definition of the word you choose to use, but were actually meant to include all of them. It makes Greek a very hard language to translate in certain ways, and particularly Greek philosophy, where the wider meaning of some of these words was absolutely intended to be hit on every point, not just one definition of the word. And I think that is a fascinating aspect of the language. Um, and, this is an aspect of many languages, that they're all different. They all have their different strengths and weaknesses. Greek is a great philosophical language. Um, German is a great technical language. And English is a great communication language. And there are a variety of reasons that English is so popular around the world today. Some of them certainly more laudatory than others, but the flexibility of the language is one of those reasons. And Tina says, right now I'm learning Latin. Latin's also a language that I would strongly encourage people to learn. For one thing, we have so many words in English that come from Latin and so many that come from Greek, um, and more coming even now, that it's good to know these languages. And also in reading um, older literature, there are still things that have never been translated, or certainly not um, translated into modern English, that are written in Latin and Greek, and it's good to actually be able to speak those languages and read those things for yourself. One of the things that I often see is people lamenting the impending death of cursive writing in English. And one of the things often said is, well, if you can't read cursive writing, you won't be able to read historic documents. But if you can't read Latin, there are a lot of historical documents you can't read either. If you can't read Greek, there are a lot of historical documents you can't read either. Um, and this is true for many other languages. If you happen to be able to read Chinese, you have access to a huge number of historical documents that have never been translated into English, um, and can be very fascinating. And Chinese language, historically speaking, has a very unique quality to it in that it is a pictographic system, and it is entirely possible for two people who do not speak the same language to both be able to read pictographic Chinese, because the characters stand for ideas, not literally words. So the person who wrote that historical document in ancient China might have been speaking in a way that the modern reader could never possibly chart their way through. But if you know how to interpret the symbols, you will be able to read it. I think that's a very advanced form of communication, but also a particularly difficult one because um, it requires the memorization of so many different symbols. I believe that it requires the memorization of something like 5,000 symbols just to be literate in Chinese pictograms. But the fact that it is um, intelligible between languages, I think, is a superiority that system has. And all of the different lingual systems in the world, they all have their own superiorities. Hello to Eve in the chat room, and Eve gives us greetings from Ohio. It's good to see you, Eve. I love saying hello to everyone, and I love all the different places we have people watching, and we have people all across the United States. Some days we have people saying hello from India. Some days we have people. I think it was yesterday we had someone saying hello from Dublin. We get people from all over the place, and I love that aspect of this broadcast, and I love being able to see it in the chat room as it's happening. Um, I know that as technology continues to evolve, and Tina is from Massachusetts. It's good to know that, and hello to Lavola. It's good to see you, Lavola. Um, and I know that in the future we will probably have more of a video component in this, although video components can be a little more, how can I put it, difficult, because you do have trolls out there who go around seeking to disrupt broadcasts like this. And I've had that happen when I was doing my chat room open to the entire public. We had people who would come and try to disrupt it with pornography and other things. Today I do my chat room through my Patreon. Still do it every Monday. Been doing it since 1998. But now it's for members of my Patreon, which, among other things, means we don't get trolls coming in to disrupt. And if anyone's interested in my Patreon, you can find that at revdonlewis.com. And it is a nice little community. And Eve says, "You're very appreciated." Thank you, Eve. I appreciate that. It's interesting. We're coming up on the end of year 23 Aquarius. And if you're not familiar with what I mean by that, that's part of the Correllian calendar, which places the turn of the astrological age at the Christian year 2000, and starts numbering from zero in the Aquarian age. And we could probably do a whole show about that at some point. But if you've wondered where that usage comes from, that's where it comes from. But as we come to the end of year 23 and the beginning of year 24, I'm coming up on the 45th year of my Imperium as first priest in the Correllian tradition. I'm now first priest retired in office, but still in office. And it's been a very interesting ride. It's had some wonderful ups and some very definite downs. Um, but this is to be expected from any path that's worth walking. And, when I look back on it, the one thing I cannot say is that it was ever boring. Um, and it's certainly that and all the other paths that have come from it. My role in pagan media, my role as an artist. Many of these things have been intimately bound to my role as a priest, my role in pagan politics. All of these things have interacted to some point, and all of them um, have had their moments when they tested every political muscle imaginable. And but overall, I've been very pleased, and I do feel like the work that I have done, the efforts I have made, have touched many people in positive ways. And I think that the the um, the downs are worth the ups. And I think that's true of life in general. Nobody has a life that has no downs, or as they say, into every life, some rain must fall. Um, it's the nature of life to be challenging. It's the nature of life to have great ups and great downs, and this is part of its purpose. Life is about growth and transformation. Um, the one thing you should absolutely not be at the end of a life in this world is exactly as you started. Um, my understanding is that this particular existence is all about transformation and growth, hopefully toward the positive, hopefully constantly building on the lessons that we need to learn and grow from. And some of those are harder than others. Some of those are more pleasant than others. And working as a psychic for so many years, um, I've certainly also had a bit of an insight into other people's lives. Um, so I know that we all have those ups and downs. And I think one of the mistakes that people often make is they focus more on the downs than on the ups. And I think that, I was speaking one day about the idea of a gratitude list, of taking time to list all of the good things in your life, the things you're grateful for, that you might not normally stop and think about. And that almost always, if you do this, you'll find more than you were aware of. And it really will change your attitude toward life. Um, Too often, people focus only on their problems, only on the difficulties in life, and end up spending all of their life sitting around complaining about other people, um, and doing nothing to actually build a good situation for themselves. When we stop and think about the good things in our life, the good things we have done, the good things we can do, I feel that we empower ourselves much more strongly to continue to build good things in our own lives. And I think that really is always where our focus should be, on how to do that next right thing, on how to build positive things for ourselves and the people that we're with. And I think that when we do that, we're always going to be happier than when we focus only on the things that we don't like. Now, as we look at society today, one of the worst things of the present generation is the extent to which so many people have become addicted to outrage. Um, so much of the media, um, both the older, more formal media and our more modern social media, are almost completely addicted to exaggerated emotions of anger and outrage, and spend very little time looking at good things. And I think we see the effect of that all around us. And Eve says, "You have enlightened many. The courses are amazing, and I'm grateful for all your work." Thank you, Eve. I really appreciate that. Um, I, I, like I say, I feel that that really is what makes the work worthwhile, to know that you have affected people in a positive way. Um, and I think that if there's one thing that I think would be beneficial if we could all focus on, it's bringing more positivity into our communications, more positivity into our lives, more positivity into our social media. Um, I've long known that some of my work would get a lot more views if I chose to do more sensational or outrageous topics. But I've always chosen not to do that. When I was doing my vlog, which I did for 10 years, I was very much aware that if instead of speaking about um, more serious metaphysical subjects, I were to stop and talk about demons and other sensational subject matter, I would probably get more people watching. But that isn't what I was doing it for, and still is not. Tina says, "This is why I turn off the TV and put on some smooth jazz. And from there I paint or make something nice." And, I think that is a very good reaction. Um, and I'm certainly not saying we should not be concerned with the things that are happening in our lives. Of course we should. The things happening in our world, many of them are very concerning. But we should keep our reactions practical and not be caught up in addiction to outrage. And, I think that Jerry Springer was probably the origin of a lot of this, because if you remember, his show at the time was considered rather scandalous because it was constantly on these highly emotionalized, highly sensationalized um, subjects that were guaranteed to bring outrage from the audience. And slowly, I think our entire media has become more greatly Jerry Springerized. I will have to say that even, back in the 70s, you were already starting to see this with news broadcasts. They had the saying, "What bleeds leads." Um, and yeah, I know that it certainly does generate eyes. Um, but I think as people, we need to stop being enticed by that and start really looking at the effect it's having. Um, there are people who just seem to spend all of their time looking for something else to upset them because they become addicted to that feeling. And, when you're in that place, you can't do anything positive. You can't move on to build positive things. All you can do is tear down. And, I've spoken before that in the pagan community, we have certain people who are only able to tear down and can't ever bring themselves to the point that they're done tearing down and ready to build something. But it's not only the pagan community, it's the entire wider community at this point. And I think that is a terrible place for humanity to be. So, going back to where we started with grammar and language, this is one of the reasons I think we need to continue to involve niceties and nuances in our use of language. That the idea of being constantly concise um, has a tendency to cause us to be misunderstood, to be thought to be harsher than we mean to be, and to feed that emotional addiction to outrage. Um, I personally think we're better off with a little bit more polite and courtly language of the sort that our grandparents might have used in their correspondence, depending, of course, on who our grandparents were. But the sort of thing you would have seen more in the era when people were corresponding a lot and were very conscious of how they use their language. I think that if we could bring that to our social media in general, maybe we could move on from this constant orgy of outrage that we see all around us. Um, Now, that's not to say there aren't things we should be legitimately outraged about, but rather to say that our reaction to that should be a practical one, not an emotional indulgence. Because one of the things you see with those people who are addicted to outrage is um, they're never really trying to do anything to improve the situations that outrage them. They're just obsessing over them. I think it takes a more positive attitude to be able to improve things. So I see with that we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I love spending this time with you. I love seeing everyone in the chat room. I will be back on Monday. I hope you have a lovely weekend. On Sunday, Sunday night, we will be doing Yule Ritual here on Pagan TV and Pagan World TV, I mean, and we will be doing that. We'll be doing that at 9 Eastern Time or 8 Central Time, and I hope you will consider joining us for that or watching it afterwards because, of course, the recording will be here forever. And Tina says, what time? 8 Central, 9 Eastern. And I personally will be doing live Yule Ritual earlier in the day here in Vermilion County, but that will not be broadcast. That will just be here. But Sunday evening, we'll have a broadcast ritual, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it will be lovely, and I hope to see everyone there. So with that, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to make our meanings clear in our conversations and our communications. Help us also to have practical reactions to situations rather than knee-jerk reactions to situations, and to use these skills to build a better life. Help us to be focused on the better things in life, the triumphs of life, the joys of life. And we rejoice in this life that you have given us. We rejoice in your presence in our walk through life. For we know we walk with you hand in hand, even though sometimes we forget you're there. And knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence. And may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I will see you on Monday.